are watching El Journo.
Welcome to the second installment of El Journo, the life and times of a young journalist making his way in radio broadcasting. So, the year 2003, a couple of months into an internship in a place I didn't mean to go, but I was left with. And in part one, I alluded to the fact that I'd started off in this provincial town, but I didn't really go into the reasons why I was there or how I got there. So the place where I was studying at the time, the period in which internships came up, the plum jobs, that sort of stuff, the places where everyone went to go, I was sort of missing in action. And that was down to food poisoning. I was in hospital for about a month, recovering after a very bad dose of Campylobacter, had some dodgy chicken and paid for it. It was one of those situations where I got worse and worse, and by about the fourth day after having this dodgy chicken, delirious, my mother calls up, phone call, and she can see that I'm in a bad way, doesn't know what's going on, calls an ambulance, and I'm rushed to the hospital. It's about 3 days later before I really realize what's going on. So it was one of these occasions where I was in hospital for about a week or 10 days and then sort of a bed rest for the next couple of weeks. So by the time I come back to my studies, internships have come and gone. So that year finishes, and really I had to sort of find my own way because there wasn't a lot going on. And as I mentioned in part one, my nana, her best friend, her son was the station manager of a provincial radio station. So that's how I got the in. But that's the backstory to how I got there. So as I mentioned in part one, no systems, no nothing in the station at the time. So I really had to sort of find my own feet very quickly, set up my own stuff, and it wasn't something I was really expecting because I was thinking I would sort of fall into it. There'd be some sort of systems, processes to, rely on. So effectively I had to build those on the spot. So several weeks go by and I'm starting to find my feet. It's one of those sort of situations in a gig like that where you have to generate daily news for, several radio broadcasts, morning, evening and night. Some of them pre-recorded, some of them live, most pre-recorded though. You really have to have good systems because you're the only person there in that station doing the news, doing the whole kit and caboodle, morning, noon and night. Even though you're not there the whole time, you have to prepare ahead, all that sort of stuff. So I had to really hit the ground running and come up with things that worked. Get on press release mailing lists, all sorts of stuff. Go out, meet people, talk to people over the phone, start getting some news, generating and ideas, learn the lay of the land in the, province that I was working. So that was my drink. I'm about 4 bourbons deep at this point. It's a Friday night here in New Zealand. Here's the glass clinking. Cheers to you if you're listening as well. No better time to record one of these videos when, maybe I'm a couple of drinks deep. But anyway, I've been there several weeks by now, slowly finding my way. And it comes up to budget day. And in a province in New Zealand, that's where I'm based if you didn't already know that, budget day can be either two things. It can be a real bonanza or it can be a bit of a damp squib. And what I mean by that is political parties, as you'll know, wherever you are in the world, they play favourites. And some regions do better than others, depending on, priorities at the time and all that sort of stuff. It really depends on, they'll try to sprinkle a bit of money throughout a country, make sure that everyone gets a little bit, that sort of stuff. So in this particular occasion, so it's my first budget day, new radio journalist, only a few weeks into, well, several weeks into my internship in this provincial radio station, and there's a press release that comes out from the governing party of the day, it's headed by the local MP, talking about all the money that's going to this new school. It was about $500,000 each year for the next 4 years. For, I think it was like rebuilds or, new classrooms, something like that. So I'm thinking, okay, well, this is clearly going to be my lead for the next day. Out of all the things that were announced, that was the strongest thing. And it's a game of numbers in the journalism game. You're really looking what you've got there. You just rank them in order. It's very much like, a boxing YouTube channel. On the daily news that's around, you see what's around, Think about the angles that you can talk about, things that you can expand on that are going to, have some general appeal, and then you talk about them. In this case, I was like, this is definitely going to be my lead. So I call the school for a bit of comment. You've got $500,000 each year for the next 4 years. I was thinking, okay, I'm going to get some comment where they're relatively ecstatic. There's a problem. So I talked to the school that's got this money, and there's a problem. A big problem, because generally, and I'd only find this sort of stuff out much later in more detail when I was involved in other areas of my career and such, that a budget cycle, generally when money gets announced over a 4-year period, it's the full 4 years that gets reported or, put out there publicly, even though the money is over 4 years. But the way it was represented in the press release from the local MP and the government of the day was it was this $500,000 each year for 4 years. But in reality, they were getting $500,000 in 4 years. So effectively, quarter of what had been publicly announced. And the principal was distraught about this, very upset. And of course, I'm thinking, well, this is really going sideways for them. This is, even though it's a tragedy for them, the newsworthy of the misunderstanding through a press release, all that sort of stuff. I'm thinking, well, this is going to be a great lead story. So after that, I'm pursuing the local MP, trying to get her on the phone and trying to make sense of what has actually happened. Even though this local MP really had no say or sway over the decision, over the money, but they're the one that locally is trying to sell this to the local, to the public. Trying to say, this is what we're doing in your region, all this sort of stuff. And I get her on the phone. And she's very upset what's happened here, because it makes not only her party look bad, her look bad, because she's been all over town saying all this sort of stuff, how this school is going to be getting all this money to do all this work over the next 4 years. So it's going to blow back on her. So she says, I'll call you back later, I need to look into this. Calls me back about half an hour later. And bear in mind, some of this back and forth with the school, the principal, with the local MP, all that sort of stuff, it's been going on for hours now, 3-4 hours. Plus I've been talking to the opposition MP, who's really getting stuck in about what's happening here. So I'm thinking, man, this is going to be gold for the bulletin the next day. And then I get a call back later in the day from the local MP who says, it was a mistake what was in there, but we've said this publicly. We've told everyone what's happening. They will get the money that's in the press release. They will get the money that we've said they will get. Everyone knows that they're going to be getting this money. We're going to give it to them because, it's the right thing to do. It's our mistake. We didn't fully explain this properly, so they will get what we've told them they're getting. So I call the school principal, very happy, ecstatic, thanking me, because she was thinking that without the not overt pressure, but the pressure that I'd put on through my inquiries, she thought that I had actually tipped the scales to ensure that they'd get the money. So I'm feeling pretty good about this, and I get some comment from her and all that sort of stuff. And in some ways, because they were getting the money that they were getting originally as stated, it was kind of like part of the story, even though it was a bit ropey with what had happened. It was kind of like I didn't feel I could report it, because they were getting what they said they were getting. So I just played a straight bat and just reported it as is. The general comments, that sort of stuff, comments from the local and opposition MP, all that sort of stuff. It was only later in my career when I sort of thought about it, and I thought, well, actually, I really could have played that a bit differently. I could have played up the fact that there was this, controversy, the will they, won't they, all that sort of stuff. And it was only actually several years later that I sort of thought about it, after having been involved in the government process, working in a different position, that even though the MP said they'll get the money, because remember, I was only in this internship in this province for about 6 months, so I moved on to other things and forgot about it. But it was much later in my career doing different things that I was like, well, hang on. This situation with this money, there is no way that the Treasury of New Zealand would have actually just sort of said, oh, well, there was a mistake in the communications relaying this money. we'll give it to them. We'll just increase it by effectively 3/4. That just wouldn't happen. So even though the local MP said, we've said we'll give them the money, we'll get the money, later I came to realise that actually they wouldn't have got the money, and they would have felt very hard done by, down the track in the next financial year. They wouldn't have been getting $500,000 a year. It would have actually only been the $500,000 over 4 years. So, I guess it's one of those things that even though the local MP was impressed at the tenacity in which I showed to try track her down, try to get to the bottom of the story, it even offered me a job as a researcher. It was one of those things. She said what she said, really not being able to deliver on the promise, but I didn't know that at the time. But it was only later I came to realise it was a big crock of shit. But it was certainly a really interesting time to be introduced to the budget process, what happens, and how people and money is delivered for projects. And when there's a cock up, often they're big, but sometimes you can paper over the cracks and it's not going to come out till years later. And that was Journo Part 2. In future episodes, I'm going to delve into the dodgy station manager. Certain events, certain things, lots of hijinks, always exciting.